You know, sometimes we get so caught up in the idea that life is supposed to move in a straight line, school, job, promotion, success, that we start panicking when things don't follow that timeline. We measure our progress by how quickly doors open, and when they don't, we assume something's wrong with us. But what if the pause isn't punishment? What if the delay is divine? What if God's saying, I'm not denying you, I'm developing you? It's easy to say we trust God's plan when everything's flowing, when the interview went well, when the bills are paid, when the path seems clear. But true trust shows up in the waiting, in the silence, in those moments when you're sending out applications, hearing nothing back, and wondering if heaven even got your prayer. That's where faith becomes more than a word. That's where it becomes the air you breathe. See, God's timing doesn't work like ours. We live by clocks and calendars, but God lives by calling and character. While you're watching the hours tick by, God's shaping the hours into something holy. You think you're just waiting to be hired, but God is preparing to launch you. He's not on your schedule because he's too busy setting up something eternal. When God withholds something, it's not because he's cruel. It's because he knows what's coming. He knows what your heart can handle and what it can't yet carry. Sometimes he has to slow you down so your strength can catch up with your assignment. You're praying for a position, but he's building the person who can sustain it, because promotion without preparation is dangerous. It can destroy what God meant to bless. I've learned that God's delays are full of purpose. Think about it. Maybe you didn't get that job because it distracted you from what you were truly meant to do. Maybe that rejection wasn't rejection at all. It was protection. Maybe God shut that door because he knew the atmosphere on the other side would drain your spirit. We often call it disappointment, but heaven calls it redirection. And I get it. Waiting hurts. It's uncomfortable when you don't have an answer, when you feel like everyone else is moving forward while you're stuck in neutral. But let me tell you, nothing about your life is stuck. You may not see progress, but that doesn't mean progress isn't happening. Seeds grow underground long before they break through the surface. God does his best work in the dark when nobody's watching, when nobody's applauding. So if you're in a season where nothing seems to be working, I need you to hear me, it's working. Not the way you expected, not in the timeline you planned, but it's working. God is arranging connections, aligning opportunities, refining your character. He's teaching you to depend on him, not the paycheck, not the title, not the plan. Because when you finally step into what he's prepared, you'll know it wasn't your RA Sum A. It was his hand. Sometimes we think God's silence means he's forgotten about us. But silence doesn't mean absence. Silence means strategy. When God is quiet, he's up to something. You might not hear him because he's busy moving pieces in the background, creating alignment for your destiny. The right job, the right people, the right timing, all of it is being woven together in ways you can't yet see. The truth is, we often want God to move faster, but he's more interested in moving deeply. He's not trying to get you somewhere quickly. He's trying to get you there ready. If he opened every door you wanted right now, you'd walk in half prepared, half healed, half aware of who you really are. But when you learn to trust his timing, you discover that the waiting wasn't wasted. It was necessary. So stop comparing your timeline to someone else's. You don't know what God's doing behind their curtain, and you don't know what he's still writing in your story. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not coming. Don't let impatience push you out of position. When you rush the process, you risk missing the promise. Every season of waiting is a classroom, and God is the teacher. He's teaching you patience, faith, discernment. He's teaching you to listen to his voice instead of the noise of fear. You might not get the job you prayed for, but you might get a revelation that changes the course of your life. You might discover that your purpose isn't in the position you thought you wanted, but in the peace that comes from surrendering to his plan. I've learned that trust doesn't always feel like confidence. Sometimes trust feels like trembling faith, the kind that says, God, I don't know what you're doing, but I believe you're doing something. It's that quiet surrender, that whisper that says, I'll wait even when it's hard. I'll trust even when it hurts. I'll believe even when I can't see. Because when you truly trust God's timing, you stop chasing what's not aligned. You stop begging for things that don't fit. You stop forcing doors that were never meant to open, and you start walking with peace, knowing that what's meant for you won't miss you, not because you're perfect, but because he's faithful. So if you're in that space right now between prayers and answers, between vision and manifestation, hold on. Don't give up because it's taking longer than you expected. God is still writing your story, and the next chapter is going to make sense of all the waiting. The timing may not make sense now, but when it all unfolds, you'll look back and say, oh, that's why. Because the truth is God's timing is never late. It's just later than your comfort zone. And that's where trust is born. You know, one of the hardest things about not having a job or not being where you thought you'd be by now is how it messes with your sense of identity, because we've been trained to introduce ourselves by what we do, not by who we are. I'm a teacher. I'm an engineer. I'm a nurse. I'm a manager. But what happens when you don't have a title? What happens when you're between jobs or starting over or still figuring it out? Suddenly, that introduction feels heavier, doesn't it? You hesitate. You feel small. You start to wonder, ooh, am I without a title? But can I tell you something? You are not your job. You are not your paycheck. You are not your productivity. You are not your LinkedIn profile or the number of zeros on your income. You are God's creation, chosen, called, and loved. Even when your calendar looks empty, your identity was set before you ever filled out an application. Before you were formed in your mother's womb, God already had your purpose in mind. So if the job didn't work out, your purpose didn't disappear with it. We live in a world that teaches us to attach our value to performance. If you're busy, you must be important. If you're successful, you must be valuable. But God doesn't see it that way. When he looks at you, he doesn't see an employee. He sees a masterpiece. He doesn't ask, what have you accomplished? He asks, do you know who you are in me? Because if your worth depends on your work, you'll always be one disappointment away from a breakdown. There's a dangerous lie the world whispers, that your job defines your identity. But God says your identity defines your job. When you know who you are, you stop chasing positions to prove yourself. You stop accepting jobs that drain your spirit just because they pay well. You stop settling for less than what aligns with your calling. Because when you understand your value, you won't waste time trying to convince others of it. Sometimes God will remove the job, the title, the platform, just to remind you that you were somebody before you ever had any of it. You were valuable before the promotion. You were chosen before the company. You were anointed before anyone noticed. He'll strip away the things that make you feel secure so you can rediscover the security that only comes from him. Because if you find your identity in anything that can be taken away, you'll always live in fear of losing it. I remember seasons when I felt like I had nothing to show for my effort. I was working hard, praying harder, and still feeling invisible. It's a strange thing to be gifted but unseen, to be willing but overlooked, to be ready but waiting. And in those moments, I had to confront something deep inside me. Was I doing this for validation Or was I doing it because it was who I was created to be? Because when your worth is tied to validation, you'll chase applause instead of purpose. But when your worth is rooted in God, you can stand tall in silence, knowing that your calling doesn't need an audience to be real. You might be in a season where it feels like your identity is slipping away because you're not doing what you thought you'd be doing. But can I tell you, God's not confused about who you are. You may have lost a job, but you haven't lost your name. You may have lost a position, but you haven't lost your power. You may have lost your sense of direction, but you haven't lost your destiny. Those things don't expire just because circumstances change. When God looks at you, he doesn't see unemployment. He sees development. He sees potential being refined, character being built, faith being strengthened. He sees you learning to stand without the labels. Because sometimes God will let the labels fall away so you can learn to live in your truth, that you are loved, chosen, worthy, and equipped. It's funny how when we meet people, one of the first things we ask is, what do you do? But rarely do we ask, who are you becoming? And that's the real question, isn't it? Because what you do can change in a moment, but who you're becoming, that's eternal. God is far more concerned with your becoming than you're doing. The job will come, the opportunity will open. But right now, he's shaping your identity so that when you get there, you won't lose yourself trying to keep it. Don't despise the season where you don't have a title. Use it to rediscover the parts of you that got buried under the business. Reconnect with your gifts, your voice, your joy. Remember what makes you come alive, because God didn't just create you to fill a position. He created you to carry his presence. And that doesn't require an office, a paycheck, or a title. So if you're in between, if you're unsure, if you're feeling invisible, breathe. You are still enough. You are still chosen. You are still favored. God hasn't changed his mind about you. The world might say you're in transition, but heaven says you're in transformation. You're not unemployed, you're being unleashed. The next time you feel tempted to introduce yourself by what you do, try introducing yourself by who you are, a child of God walking by faith, becoming who you were always meant to be. Because when you know who you are without the title, you'll never let a title define you again. You know, waiting seasons have a way of exposing what's really inside of us. When life slows down and the doors stop opening, it's easy to feel forgotten, overlooked, maybe even unworthy. But I've learned that waiting isn't wasted. It's working. It's doing something deep in you that success never could. Because when everything feels like it's standing still, God is actually stirring something beneath the surface. He's not punishing you. He's preparing you. There's something sacred about the seasons when nobody's calling your name, when nobody's applauding, when your efforts feel invisible. That's where strength is born. That's where faith gets tested and matured. Because if you only trust God when you see progress, that's not faith, that's comfort. True faith says, even when nothing is moving, I still believe he's working. And he is, you just can't see it yet. We love to celebrate the harvest, the breakthroughs, the answered prayers, the job offers, the promotion emails, but God celebrates the soil, the seasons where you're planted in the dark, waiting to sprout, trusting that something is growing even though it doesn't look like it. You see, before you can handle the weight of what you're praying for, you have to have the roots to sustain it. And roots grow in secret. Some of you are frustrated because it feels like life hit pause. You're doing everything you can and still the doors won't open. But maybe God isn't saying no. Maybe he's saying not yet. Because if he gave you what you're asking for right now, it might crush you instead of crown you. Sometimes he delays the dream to develop the dreamer. He lets you sit in the stillness so you can build endurance, discipline, and trust. because the very thing you're praying for will require those qualities when it arrives. Think about Joseph. God gave him a dream, but before the dream came to life, Joseph was betrayed, sold, imprisoned, and forgotten. Every step of his waiting season felt unfair, but every step was preparation. God was teaching him humility in the pit, integrity in Potiphar's house, and endurance in the prison. So when Joseph finally stood in the palace, he didn't just have the position, he had the wisdom and the heart to handle it. That's what God does. He builds character in the dark so that when the light shines, you won't lose yourself in the spotlight. Sometimes you'll pray for opportunity and God will answer with opposition. You'll pray for strength and he'll give you struggle. You'll pray for wisdom and he'll give you waiting. It doesn't feel fair, but it's forming something in you that comfort never could, because the truth is easy seasons don't produce depth. Waiting does. Waiting stretches you. It teaches you how to rely on God when the plan doesn't make sense. It teaches you to pray differently, to think differently, to see yourself differently. In the waiting, you start to realize that your value isn't in what you're doing, it's in who you're becoming. You begin to find peace not in progress, but in presence. You stop asking, when will this end? And start asking, God, what are you trying to teach me here? That's when waiting transforms from frustration into formation. That's when you start to see that this season isn't punishment. It's positioning. And I know that's not always easy to hear, because sometimes you're tired of being patient. And so I'm tired of praying the same prayer. You're tired of believing for something that seems to be moving further away. But if you only knew what God was arranging behind the scenes, you'd stop worrying about when it's going to happen and start preparing for how you'll handle it when it does. You see, we think waiting is passive, like we're just sitting around hoping something changes, but godly waiting is active. It's choosing to grow while you wait. It's using this time to strengthen your spirit, sharpen your skills, and settle your heart. Because when God finally says go, you don't want to still be at the starting line. You want to be ready to run. There are some things that can only be developed in the quiet seasons. Strength, patience, endurance. Those don't come when everything's easy. They come when you're stretched. They come when you cry out to God and he doesn't move the mountain, but instead gives you the strength to climb it. That's when you realize the waiting wasn't holding you back, it was holding you together. I want you to understand something. What feels like silence from God isn't absence. He's not ignoring you. He's training you. He's letting you learn to recognize his voice, not just his blessings. Because when the blessings come, you'll need to be grounded enough to know who they came from. He's not just trying to get you a job. He's trying to build your character, your resilience, your ability to lead with compassion instead of ego. And here's the beautiful thing: when you finally come out of that waiting season, you'll see that everything you went through was necessary. Every no was a redirection. Every delay was divine. Every tear watered the soil of your future. And when it finally blooms, you'll realize the waiting didn't break you, it built you. So don't despise the process. Don't rush out of the season that's shaping you. God's not just preparing the promise for you, he's preparing you for the promise. And when he's done, you won't just have what you prayed for, you'll have the strength to keep it. Because every moment of waiting was working for your good, even when you couldn't see it. Sometimes the greatest blessing isn't in what you receive, but in who you become while you're waiting. You know, so many of us are out here chasing jobs, chasing checks, chasing stability, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to be secure. But I think sometimes we get so busy trying to make a living that we forget to alive on purpose. We start to settle for survival when God created us for significance. We prayed, Lord, bless this job, but what if God is whispering, I didn't call you to that job. I called you to a purpose. C, a paycheck can sustain you, but purpose will fulfill you. A paycheck can cover your bills, but purpose will cover your soul. And I know that sounds good on paper, but it's hard when you're sitting in the middle of uncertainty, when the rent is due, when the applications keep getting rejected. It's hard to think about purpose when you're just trying to get by. But even in that place, God is speaking. He's saying, don't chase provision, chase my plan. Because when you walk in what I called you to, provision will find you. The world will tell you to find a job that pays the most, but God will lead you to work that feeds your soul. The world says, go where the opportunity is. God says, go where the calling is, because you can have all the money, all the benefits, all the prestige, and still feel empty if it's not aligned with what you were created to do. Sometimes the very thing that looks like stability can become a trap that keeps you from walking into destiny. And I'm not saying quit your job or stop being responsible. No, that's not wisdom. What I'm saying is stop confusing employment with assignment. A job is where you work. Your calling is where you serve. A job gives you tasks. Your calling gives you purpose. And sometimes God will allow one to end so the other can begin. You may be praying for a new opportunity, and God might be saying, I already gave you one. It's inside of you. Maybe you've been so focused on looking for the next role that you've missed the purpose hidden in your current season. Maybe the people around you, your family, your community, your circle are the very place where God wants to use your gifts. Maybe he's waiting for you to stop asking for a title and start walking in your purpose, because purpose doesn't need permission, it needs obedience. You don't have to wait until everything's perfect to start living with purpose. You don't need a fancy title, a big platform, or a perfect plan. Purpose starts with a all yes. It starts with showing up where you are and saying, God, use me here. It starts with the small things, how you love people, how you show kindness, how you handle what's in front of you. The truth is, some of the greatest callings are born in quiet, ordinary moments. There's a story in the Bible about David tending sheep long before he ever fought Goliath or became king. He was out there doing something that didn't look important, but it was in that place that God developed his courage, his discipline, his heart for people. The same boy who learned to protect sheep in the pasture was the same man who learned to protect a nation. That's what purpose does. It takes what feels small and turns it into something significant. So if you're in a place that feels beneath your potential, don't despise it. Don't rush it. Let God show you the purpose, SF, in it. Maybe he's teaching you leadership where no one's watching. Maybe he's building compassion in the middle of your frustration. Maybe he's birthing creativity out of your limitations, because sometimes purpose grows best in places that feel uncomfortable. And here's the thing about purpose. It won't always make sense to other people. They'll say, why would you leave that job? Why would you take that risk? Why would you start something new when everything's uncertain? But when God plants a vision inside you, you can't explain it. You can only obey it, because what's purpose to you might look like foolishness to someone else. But you can't let people who didn't hear God's voice talk you out of what he told you to do. You might be called to build something that's never been done before. You might be called to write, to create, to serve, to mentor, to speak, to start something that meets a need others have ignored. It might not come with a paycheck at first, but it will come with peace, and peace is proof that you're walking in purpose. You can fake confidence, but you can't fake peace. And when you're walking in what God created you for, you'll feel that peace even when the path is uncertain. Don't settle for a job that gives you comfort when God is calling you into a purpose that gives you life. You can climb the ladder, You can check all the boxes and still wake up feeling unfulfilled if you're not doing what you were made to do. Because fulfillment doesn't come from what you have, it comes from who you become. So maybe this season isn't about job searching, maybe it's about soul searching. Maybe God's saying, before I open the next door, I need you to know what you're walking into, because purpose will always pull you beyond your comfort zone. It will stretch your faith, test your patience, and challenge your identity. But it will also awaken your spirit in ways that nothing else can. So don't just pray for a job, pray for alignment. Pray for clarity. Pray that your next move doesn't just make you money, but makes you meaningful. Because when your work and your calling collide, you'll stop working for survival and start living for significance. And when you finally step into that place where your passion meets God's plan, you'll realize this was never about finding a job. It was about finding yourself. You know, sometimes we're sitting around waiting for God to move, but God is waiting for us to move. We pray, Lord, open the door, and God says, I already gave you the key, because obedience isn't about understanding everything. It's about trusting that if he told you to move, he's already made a way. We say we're waiting on God, but the truth is sometimes God is waiting on us to take that first step of faith. Obedience doesn't always look glamorous. It's not always a big, bold announcement. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's doing the small thing that doesn't make sense yet, applying for the opportunity you feel unqualified for, reaching out to the person God placed on your heart, starting something even when you don't see the full picture. We want clarity before we act, but God often gives confirmations after we act, because faith always requires movement. God never asked you to figure it all out. He asked you to trust him enough to obey. And obedience isn't about perfection. It's about surrender. It's about saying, God, I don't have all the details, but I trust that you do. When you live like that, you open yourself up to divine opportunities you could never create on your own, because obedience is the language heaven responds to. We love the idea of miracles, but we often forget that miracles are activated through movement. When Peter stepped out of the boat, he didn't wait for the water to turn solid first. He stepped out while it was still uncertain. That's what faith looks like. It's walking when the ground doesn't feel stable yet. It's trusting that if God called you to it, he's already prepared it. There's a story about the 10 lepers who came to Jesus for healing. He didn't touch them. He didn't even pray over them. He simply said, go show yourselves to the priests. And the Bible says, as they went, they were healed. Not before, not after, as they went. The healing was in the movement. And I believe that same principle applies to us. Sometimes you're waiting for your breakthrough, but your breakthrough is waiting for your obedience. You might be praying for a job, but God's saying, start preparing for what you've been praying for. You might be asking for a direction, but God's saying, take one step and I'll show you the next. Because he leads us one step at a time, not one lifetime at a time. We want the blueprint, but God gives us breadcrumbs. And every act of obedience becomes a trail that leads straight to purpose. It's not that God doesn't want to bless us. It's that he blesses through our obedience. He doesn't just drop opportunity in our laps. He develops it through our willingness to act. And here's the thing, obedience doesn't always look like success. Sometimes it looks like doing what God told you to do and nothing happens right away. Sometimes it looks like sowing seeds in silence, trusting that even though the ground looks the same, something is happening underneath, because obedience isn't about immediate results. It's about eternal impact. There are moments when God will test your faith with small assignments. He'll ask you to be faithful over what feels insignificant. A part-time job, a volunteer role, a conversation, a step toward a dream that doesn't make sense yet. And if you can be faithful there, he'll trust you with more because God promotes through faithfulness. You can't skip obedience and still expect overflow. I think sometimes we underestimate how powerful small acts of obedience can be. You never know what door one yes can open. One act of obedience can shift your whole trajectory. It can connect you to people, places, and possibilities you couldn't have planned. That phone call you almost didn't make, that class you almost didn't take, that application you almost didn't submit. Those small acts might be the exact moments God uses to change everything. The truth is, obedience isn't always easy. It requires you to trust God's voice over your own logic. It requires you to move before you're ready, to give before you see return, to believe before there's evidence. But when you do, you learn that obedience is the key that unlocks the next level of your life, because God doesn't bless comfort zones. He blesses faith zones. You might be thinking, what if I step out and fail? But what if you step out and they fly? What if the very thing you're afraid of doing is the thing that will set you free? God doesn't expect perfection. He just wants participation. He wants you to trust that he knows where this road leads. Even when it feels uncertain, your obedience is never wasted. Every step of faith plants a seed in your future, and don't get it twisted. Obedience isn't always about the big dramatic moments. Sometimes it's choosing to forgive. Sometimes it's saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. Sometimes it's walking away from something that looks good but isn't a God. That's obedience too. And it's often those quiet behind the scenes moments that shape the biggest breakthroughs. So if you feel stuck, if you feel like nothing is moving, ask yourself, what was the last thing God told me to do? Because sometimes we're praying for new instructions when we haven't followed the old ones. When you move in obedience, heaven moves in response. God's not looking for perfection. He's looking for a willing heart. And when you step out trembling, uncertain, but obedient, you'll see doors open that you never had to force. Because obedience opens what effort never could. And when you look back, you'll realize it wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was obedience that unlocked everything. Sometimes when life isn't going the way we planned, it's easy to think that God has forgotten us. We look around and see other people moving forward, new jobs, new homes, new opportunities, and we start to wonder, God, what about me? But I need you to know something. God hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't overlooked you. What he's doing in your life is so much bigger than what you can see right now. You may think you're in a holding pattern, but you're actually in the middle of a divine setup. We serve a God who sees the end from the beginning. While you're worried about this moment, God's already working in moments you haven't reached yet. You see only one piece of the puzzle, but he sees the full picture. And sometimes he won't give you the whole image, because if he did, you try to rush the process, you try to take shortcuts. But God's plan for you is too big to be built on shortcuts. It's built on surrender. What you're facing right now might look like a detour, but it's actually direction. That closed door wasn't rejection, it was redirection. God isn't just preparing something for you. He's preparing you for something. And sometimes that requires him to strip away the things you thought you needed so he can reveal who you really are. Because if you walked into the next season with the same mindset you had in the last one, you'd miss the miracle he's setting up for you. We love to say, God has a plan for my life, but let's be honest, we only love that plan when it looks like our plan. The moment it takes a turn we didn't expect, we start to question it. We start asking, why this? Why now? But what if the very thing you're fighting against is the thing God is using to grow you? What if the disappointment you're trying to escape is the soil where you're destiny is being planted. God's plan doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like loss. Sometimes it looks like confusion. Sometimes it looks like standing in a place where you don't understand a thing he's doing. But just because it doesn't look good right now doesn't mean it's not working for your good. Romans 8:28 doesn't say that all things good. It says all things work together for good. That means even the tears, even the rejection, even the setbacks, they're all ingredients in the masterpiece God is creating with your life. And I know it's hard when you can't see how it's going to come together. You're doing everything you can, praying, fasting, believing, and still the doors aren't opening. But sometimes God delays the visible blessing so he can strengthen your invisible foundation. Because when your blessing comes, he doesn't want it to break you. He wants it to build you. So he's teaching you how to carry weight now so that when the overflow hits, you'll be able to handle it with grace. You might feel like you've been buried, but you haven't been buried. You've been planted. There's a difference. When something is buried, it's meant to stay dead. But when something is planted, it's meant to grow. The soil feels the same. The darkness feels the same, but the outcome is completely different. You're not buried in this season. You're being cultivated. God is working beneath the surface. Even when it feels silent on the surface, sometimes his plan requires separation. He'll pull you out of certain environments, relationships, and patterns, not to punish you, but to prepare you. You might feel lonely, but that's not isolation. That's incubation. He's developing you privately so he can reveal you publicly. He's teaching you to depend on his presence instead of people's approval, because what's coming next isn't something you'll be able to attribute to anyone else's hand but his. And when God finally brings you into what he's been preparing, you'll see why it had to happen this way. You'll understand why he said no, why he delayed it, why he made you wait. You'll look back and say, I had gotten what I wanted when I wanted it. I wouldn't have been ready for it. You'll realize that what felt like loss was really positioning. What felt like delay was really development. What felt like a breakdown was really the setup for a breakthrough. That's the beauty of God's plan. It's always bigger than what we can see. While we're focused on one chapter, he's writing the whole story. And he's not just writing a story about success. He's writing a story about redemption. Every pain, every detour, every disappointment, he's weaving it together into something that will not only bless you, but bless others through you. Because the truth is, God's plan for you isn't just about you. It's about the people connected to you, the lives that will be changed because of your obedience, the hearts that will find hope through your story. That's why the waiting is necessary. That's why the process matters. You're not just being prepared for a position, you're being prepared for purpose. So stop saying nothing is happening, everything is happening, you just can't see it yet. The seed doesn't know when spring is coming, but it still grows toward the light, and that's what you have to do. Keep growing, keep believing, keep trusting that God's plan is unfolding even when it doesn't look like it. Because he's not just setting you up for a job, he's setting you up for impact. What you thought was the end of something was really the beginning of everything.